if you start off with that, because that takes it on a whole new realm of possibilities. Go.
Hi, this is Paula Gloria welcoming you back to round 2 or 3. I don't know how I'm going to get all of this edited. With Ralph Poynter and Betty Davis, we're going into a very deep discussion about Lynne Stewart and about the implications of Lynne's being in prison, the implications of compassionate release if Lynne comes out of prison. Will we have a society that can receive Lynne with the full maturity of the wisdom and experience that she's gained and the seeds that she's planted? What do you all think about Lynne being released?
Well, as it was stated just before we got to the end of the last conversation, as Betty was saying, how is it that this wonderful woman is in jail at all? Where are the people? And as Ralph Shonman screamed and shouted, where are the lawyers? And I say, the people are afraid and selfish. As so many of the lawyers said to Lynne, Lynne, you have made a career of sticking your thumb in the government's eye. And Lynne says, isn't that what a lawyer is supposed to do? We're supposed to say when the government has a criminal prosecution, no, you cannot go there because the law prevents you. And even people that you don't want to have access to the law should have access to the law. Anybody indicted by the government should have a defense. I think that's what the words say, but that's not what everybody understands. What are you doing supporting those black kids who are bringing drugs into their community? Well, she didn't support them. She defended them against the government because the defense is merely a process. And if these kids lose it, we all lose it. And then on another level,
if they lose their right to defend, be defended.
If they lose their Fourth Amendment rights. We've all lost our Fourth Amendment rights.
Right. And so, and it's a process, and we'll get into which amendment that it is. I thought it was the Sixth Amendment.
I'm sorry, Sixth.
You know,
there I go again.
That's not the issue. The issue is, you know, with
any right
injustice to
one is lost by all.
Injustice to all.
Right.
But that's not the issue. The point is that is one level. The other level is that, and bear with me on this, is that America has never been more than a criminal enterprise. America has never been more than a criminal enterprise. And let us remember our history. What was America but trading companies? And here we are.
Being traded.
200. No. And here we are. Trading companies, corporations are running the country. They're telling the Supreme Court what to do, and the Supreme Court is making them people.
I'm not kidding about being traded, Ralph.
Well,
I mean, my traffic's stolen on the internet. That's what I'm saying. It's criminal to take
on
property.
every level. And so, goes to the basic. Who is America, and what is America? And when we talk about Lynne Stewart has been defying accepted norms. She defied them because they're not just and they're not true. And so this has been her career. Let's go. There was a famous sportscaster said, let's go to the video camera. Lynne Stewart, let's go to the truth. Let's go to the books. Let's go to the
Instant replay, you mean?
Instant replay. Let's go to the Bill of Rights. Let's look at these things. Let's examine them. And when you examine the words, we know that America has been a lie, is a lie. And so in her life, she is bringing us the reality of the injustice system in a practical means, not in a class, but in the courtroom itself. And she has made enemies of the government. And what happened was, when she got into foreign policy, when she defended the blind Sheik, it was American foreign policy that supported dictators around the world, that support imperialism, that support the corporations, that support the money folk in this country. And when she stumbled upon Imam Salem, when the government did not know that Imam Salem, the perpetrator, the former of all of these so-called, I think he was involved in 4 so-called terrorist acts. He was the guy who suggested it and inveigled and paid guys lunch money and was the big man and rented safe houses and got so-called materials and paid so-called armor. And this is one of the funny ones that I like to raise when I talk about how bad are these cases of terrorism. I like to use Imam Salem. They've got a young man, I believe he's doing 35 years now for being an armorer. And this young man was armorer. He was to bring the weapons for this so-called fake organization that Imam Salem had set up on the Landmarks case. This young man was from Newark, New Jersey. He was a Latino who hung out in the Lower East Side. Now, you know...
It's entrapment.
Now, I got to tell the story.
He sets up people.
I got to tell the story, Betty, to show entrapment. Let me tell the story. The young man lives in Newark, New Jersey. He hangs out on the Lower East Side, and he was supposed to get armed, get guns for the guys. And he couldn't get a gun. And the only gun he got was a rusty rifle that wouldn't have worked. And Imam Salem paid him for this rusty rifle. Now, I say to you, you're living in Newark, New Jersey, you're a Latino, you're hanging out in the Lower East Side, you're a Latino, and you can't get a gun. And as a person who lived on the Lower East Side 35 years, we had as many gun shows in the Lower East Side as they do down in Texas. But the gun shows, you know, Ralph, you're going to the gun show, you know. What was the gun show? It was in somebody's basement, and they had access to guns. And let me tell you, the gun factories in New Haven, Connecticut. We would get the guns from there, brand new in the box. And I'd say, now how can that be that somebody could come from New Haven on a regular basis with new guns to sell without the system knowing it? The system had to know it, because in capitalism, if you make something, you got to sell it. And if they're short on sales, they always have these guys underground that they could shovel off a truckload to, would go to the inner cities and sell those guns. Now, this guy was in the same Lower East Side that I was in, and he couldn't even buy a gun. Well, hell, he wasn't even close enough to people who would trust him to get a gun. And I remember
going to... So
you
say he's a planted out?
Yes.
He was a dummy. He couldn't get a gun.
What she's asking
to
is
save his life.
He couldn't get a gun to save.
The government
he's an armorer,
hired him.
and he's doing.
That's what it was.
No, the government tried to hire him,
exactly,
and couldn't even do that. And he's doing 35 years. You know, he's just a mope. He couldn't do anything. And I see on trial. During the Sheik's trial, there's a young man who couldn't do anything, and I'm not going to tell his story, but he notices Imam Salem camera down low, and he looks and he says, "Is that a camera?" Imam Salem was the perpetrator of it. And he says, "Yeah," and he says, so the driver says, "Are we on TV?" And he says, Imam Salem says, "Yes, we're on TV," and the driver says, "Yes, that's good." He's doing 35 years too. Can you imagine the American public bought that? This was laughable.
So that's what you mean, Joe, when you were saying that the FBI helped to plant?
Yeah, they made it all up.
They do it all the time.
They did the same thing in the 60s.
Yeah. The same guy was in 4 terrorist cases.
Angela Davis said in her book
Excellent point.
that the FBI helped them get on to blow up the cockpit of an airplane, which they saw on television was terrorists, and the Panthers thought it's going to bring more people to them to take credit for it, right? And the FBI knew that when the plane got blown up, they would get a bigger budget
to go after the Panthers.
So the FBI helped the Panthers get on. This is when it was in Angela Davis's book. let them get on help them get on through security so they could blow up the plane with nobody on it, so nobody got killed, right? And then they hung the Panthers for it, but none of the FBI went to jail. It was all
entrapment.
Entrapment. And they set them up, but that's been standard operating procedure for our government.
So false flag operation?
Yes,
so what you're
false
saying
flag operation.
is Lynne nailed it.
Well, what Lynne did when she was cross-examining Imam Salem on the witness stand, the government didn't know, the FBI did not know that Imam Salem was taping them. And when Lynne Stewart was examining Imam Salem, she managed to say, well then, what did the FBI tell you when you said, now this goes to another case, World Trade Center 1? Because I'm trying to remember the name of the gentleman that Imam Salem was in contact with, involved in World Trade Center 1.
93, right?
Don't get me on dates
Sorry.
and times.
Okay. Again, you and Joe.
As Lynne had said, what did the FBI say when you told them the bomb, the materials that the gentleman had in World Trade Center 1 was going to explode? Imam Salem's answer, they told me shut my mouth. Lynne Stewart repeated, they told you shut your mouth. Imam Salem says, they told me shut my mouth. Judge Mukasey, the torture judge, the torture attorney general, later he became attorney general, who said waterboarding is not torture, etc., under the basis of you, the attorney who had said torture is not torture, and America is accepting torture now. Judge Mukasey said, Ms. Stewart, this is beyond the scope of this trial. And Lynne Stewart said, no, it's not. I'm examining the reliability of this witness. I'm examining him as an individual. And the judge says, no more on this line of questioning. And now you don't have to listen to this program. Go to the court record. Lynne Stewart cross-examining Imam Salem. The FBI knew about World Trade Center 1, and all of those people talking about those who died in World Trade Center 1 can put it on the FBI. Not Nasser, who was later tried in another trial with Bill Kunstler and come on, help me out here. Michael Tarif Warren, like on that case. That same Nasser was involved in World Trade Center 1. FBI knew it. Imam Salem said it. Don't listen to me. Go to the record. And
So Imam was the agent.
Imam was the agent.
The FBI was the principal.
4 times.
Notice the agent is notice to principal, right? I mean, this is piercing the corporate veil. We're talking about
corporate veil. I'm talking about conspiracy to fool the American people and to get them into the so-called war on terror. They set it up themselves. Yep. But had to use the same informant 4 times. And what did they do? And I said, Imam Salem was a slick guy. I'm listening to him on the witness stand when Lynne says, did the FBI know you have them on tape? What was his answer? No. They didn't know that he was taping them along with all of these other folks.
He did it for his protection?
He did it. I said, this is Mr. Slick. He did it. He's guaranteeing him his own life because they don't know where those tapes are. And if they do something to him, those tapes are going to come out. And I believe they're going to come out no matter what. And the world will know that Imam Salem and the FBI are very much a part of all of this so-called nonsense
now,
that we call
I don't know if the cameras
terror.
caught it, but Betty jumped. Why did you jump, Betty?
This whole thing of the false flag operations, I think you can see the same thing when Obama comes into power, the figurehead for the corporations, and they keep using the same scare tactics that they used from 9/11. As black people, the joke black people say, the Muslims are going to get your mama. And before that it was the communists going to get your mama. And before that it was, black people are going to get your mama. So now they're saying, well, you better bail out the banks or the default's going to get your mama. So you got to bail out the system so the system can live. The reality is the money was never lost. And if you trace the money, you'll know who the criminals are.
And the debt is to the American people.
And the debt is to the American people. And that's the point I wanted to make about that stadium. $720 million subsidy from public funds, yet you are closing schools, you're closing hospitals, all right? And you're taking down public libraries.
Yeah.
You're saying you're going to close post offices. But
Right.
if you look behind that, the subprime loan thing is very important. Does anybody not know that a post office in America is an American version of a British castle? They're made of marble, the most beautiful. Some of the post offices in America are mansions. They were built at a time when buildings were really built. They're works of architectural genius, and they're worth millions and millions of dollars. And when they privatize these buildings, that will be another economic resource that the public will lose.
And the rich will
And
And the rich will get richer. It's the same thing with the public schools. A charter school can get a public school for $1, and it's a subprime loan scam. And when they milk all the money out of a public school, all right,
Wow.
then they can default on whatever agreement they have, because it's a contract for something like 7 years. And then that community is left in a lurch, and their kids end up back in a public school system anyway, but a public school system that has been robbed and raped
Right.
of all of its
Plundered.
resources.
by the corporation,
Plus-
plundered by the corporation.
And this is where you see the perfidy of our institutions, and I will say the union bosses, I will not say the union workers. The unions are selling out too, because
Right.
a charter school does not allow the teachers the same rights as workers that a public school does. A public school has a whole body of law, educational law, that protects parents, protects children, and protects
It
teachers.
should protect
Or
parents.
should. But the unions are selling out their own people by allowing charter schools, and the parents are selling out a legacy that goes back to the Black Reconstruction Congress. The whole point of a public school system was to enable people not to ever descend into slavery, mentally or physically. When you take a
Right.
public school, there's certain rights that come with being a parent in a public school that you don't have in a charter school.
Wow.
So
Because
this is
slavery
very deep. I was
is
listening to
very
you
deep,
when
yeah.
you talked about how we have a note that's selling us back into slavery economically.
Right.
Your language to me is symbolic, because I don't quite understand everything you're saying.
Yeah,
but I'm
no,
willing
it took-
to listen
it took
more,
a
to
long
learn
time
more.
to learn.
But I would suggest that everyone go to the Black Agenda Report and read an article that Glenn Ford wrote when the subprime loan first happened. And his language about what this means in debt to several generations to come to pay back these loans is scary. Not just black people.
But do you know
white people are going to be
Of
slaves
course,
forever,
of course.
paying
Yes.
that
Of
debt
course.
back.
Of course, that's why when I first started learning on the internet chat groups, it was always black voices that were the most savvy. And I thought, how are they picking up on this so quick? How do they know this? And it's because it is a
Because
slavery
when you're
system.
being pushed, squashed down, you
wanted to
know
say-
it.
Well, as Lynn said to me, when we met, we began, we came from similar backgrounds. Her parents were white, Swedish, English, Irish, and German. And my folks we're just black. And same, she lived in the house she grew up to until she was 14 and, 18, go off to college, etc. And she said, gee, as you tell me, you were not a student, into academics. And I says, no. And she says, but you know so much more than I do. And she says, what I figured out is you got a 22-year head start on me. And I'm saying, how so? And she says, well, you felt it and you lived it every day, and I wasn't even reading about it. Now I have to catch up. And so how do we know? Well, man, we've been getting hit over the head ever since we're big enough to understand that we have a head. Hey, this government is down on us. They're down on people. So now you have to pay attention to that once you begin to figure it out and feel it. And it's not just new that black people are getting killed. Hell, every black person will tell you, what did you learn? Every person of my age. Don't run when you see a policeman. They'll kill you.
The important thing about Lynn to me is she's not just an attorney, but
Oh,
that
yeah.
she brought the expertise of having been a teacher in Central Harlem to her career as an attorney. One of the things she realized is how much the school system was beginning to fail all children in the lower class, black as well as white as well as black. When we lost the struggle for community control of schools.
Right.
People do not understand that if one element in your society is not free, it won't be long before they'll be coming after you for your privileges and freedom.
Right.
And one of the organizations called Impedum, Omar Abdel-Rahman is the chairperson for this group. He said Lynne committed race and class suicide when she sided with the underprivileged. She committed race suicide because she gave equal representation before the law to black and Latino defendants as she would a white defendant.
But that's what the law is. It's just
That's what the law is
justice
supposed
is blind.
Supposed to be.
Supposed to be
Supposed to
blind.
be.
But she made this happen
Real.
for
She
them.
made it real.
She made it real. Whereas prior to attorney like Lynne, you had a lawyer, they told you to take a plea, you went to jail. Regardless of whether you were innocent or not, you went to jail. They made you plea bargain.
They
Well,
still
I
do.
They
They
still
still
do.
do.
We think our entire court system is in foreclosure. Then the real meaning of foreclosure, meaning abandoned. It's abandoned. And so you have these commercial courts that are all registered with Dun and Bradstreet numbers. They're private corporations. They're money-making operations. Our real courts have been foreclosed.
They're not just.
Well,
So
They've
we
been
should-
hijacked.
Well,
Right.
let us look at the
Just
history.
as our government has been
Let us look at the
hijacked.
history of America. And I always like to go back to history. And one of the realities of the modern day slavery is the laws governing the highways. In the South, in Florida, you have to go to court for a speeding ticket to find out how slavery really works. You better be able to pay your speeding ticket or your traffic
that's
ticket,
right.
or you went through a stop. You'll go to jail on that. And when you do go to jail, and I was there, and I watched this system, the way it worked, people are in slavery due to traffic violations.
Right. Right.
And so they raise money. Now, we fast forward to the north, and I go to New Jersey. And all the statistics show that over the years on the Jersey Turnpike, don't drive there if you're black. It's going to cost you money. When you drive south, it's going to cost you money. We as a people have been terrorized over the years, and a part of that terror that gives all black folk high blood pressure is the toy of Americans, an automobile. You were a victim in your automobile because you were some person that the money could be stolen from. And if you didn't come up with the money, you would go to jail. Now, I know Dan Aykroyd did a funny thing about white guys or some white people in the north driving south, but it was real in terms of black people. And one of the historic sites, one of the historic books, I think Gulf Oil was the only place, the only stations that you were almost safe in going into to get almost civil treatment. And they used to put out a pamphlet showing you where you could stop and get decent service. And this is what America
My father lived
has
by that map.
done.
He had a map when we traveled south because our family was from the south, escaped from the south, I'd like to say. When we went back south to visit relatives, my father had a map of where the different gas stations were that serviced blacks as if they were human. Otherwise, there was no white bathroom and black bathroom, and you were treated with civility. And we traveled along a highway where we could take advantage of most of those gas stations. And that's just a reality. And anyone my age or older can tell you there were certain places that you traveled through, you made it your business not to be there as the sun set, or your life could be forfeited. So this reality of America from one group's perspective, i.e. black people, compared to a white person's perspective, is real, this contradiction. One of the things I liked as a student graduating from college and trying to decide what I was going to do with my life, and I came across Ralph Poynter giving a lecture to social workers. And at that time I was working for the department, what was called the Department of Welfare. And he said, you know, in a few years you will be irrelevant. They will have computers doing what you're doing. So this set off alarms in my head. And then later on he said, sociology is no longer a discipline that America is going to acknowledge. Sociology in America is dead. It's a police state. In a police state, you don't care about the social sciences. What does sociology concern itself with?
Well, you do care about
community, people relating to each other. In a police state, you don't want that. You want everybody separate.
Right.
So look at all our community institutions that are going under. Public libraries. You can't have a democracy without public libraries.
You know why they're going under? Because they're the logical place to have Wi-Fi. If you have strong broadband
That's one
access,
of the reasons.
public access is the greatest security to a community.
That's one of the reasons. Libraries are a place where the cast-offs go so that they won't be hassled by people who have money. You know, you can be poor and live in a shelter, and it'll make you crazy living in a shelter.
Sure.
So
Right.
you can go to a library, you can read, you can relax. You can be with people who don't put you down. Children, we used to call them latchkey children. They can go to a library after school. I mean, it is an incredible public community service librarians give us.
Right.
Not to mention the students whose college universities shut down after midnight, all right? But they still have to study, and they want access to certain databases, all right? But now they're no longer in college. They couldn't afford to pay for that next term. They can go to the library and they can access a lot of those databases for free. It's a real loss. And, of course, the public school system. And then it goes on and on. What about the institutions that we don't necessarily see as public, like WBAI? And what has happened to that voice? We all see what happened to public radio. Public
radio.
Public radio. It became a voice for the corporations, and now this is the way they want BAI to go. We have lost our voice.
That's the way public access television is going.
That's the way public access
This very
television
station
is
that we're
going.
in here now
Yes.
used to be completely public access.
Thank you.
Now commercial people come in here and rent this studio,
Making it hard for us to get
making it
time.
harder for the public access producers. It means more producers have to fight over less time.
Yes.
And I like what you said when you said you were in California and there were these people who were listening to this, looking at this documentary from our decade.
Yeah.
And the concept that symbolizes the 60s more than anything else is being open to something new, to a different possibility for life on this planet. You know, what was the hippies saying? Chill, relax.
Yeah.
That's not what they meant. What they meant was don't get uptight over somebody who's different from you, or
Right.
somebody who thinks different from you. You know, be easy. It's this
Not only
generation's
don't
word.
be uptight about it, welcome them to give you a much greater perspective on
Exactly.
what's really happening. And when you
Exactly.
know the truth, everybody goes faster and faster to the truth because it's true.
Ralph Poynter and Lynne Stewart created, with a group of teachers in New York, an organization called the Teachers Freedom Party. And this was one of the vehicles. It was an organization of people of goodwill. And they came from all political points of view. There were liberals, whatever that is.
Yeah.
There were communists. There were socialists, whatever that is. And there were just black nationalists like me who came in there. It wasn't just people spouting forth what they believed. They did that too. But they always backed it up by citing a source where they got the information. It was like a university for a person of the 60s who wanted to understand what it was that was making them so angry and making them want to fight back. And it analyzed, all the time they analyzed, they discussed, they talked, debate, and fought with each other, but it was fair fighting. They didn't fight with you and call you names. They fought with you and said, well, why don't you read that if you don't believe me? That was the name they called you. The name they called you was, well, then why don't you read? Okay? There are so few organizations like that now. How do I know? Because I still go to a lot of different meetings of a lot of different groups. People are not open to reading. They don't want to do their homework.
That is the interesting thing, and as Frederick Douglass said, slavery is incompatible with education, and everybody knows it. And so there is a shutdown, a dummying down of our society. You'll be surprised, and I don't know if you would be surprised, as to what people do not know, do not understand, and they no longer care that they do not know and they do not understand.
Back to you were talking about the stadium.
Yes.
Part of the reason that the government is doing the stadium is because if everybody's watching football and baseball, they're not paying attention to politics. They're not looking at the hospitals that they're losing.
Thank you.
They're not losing all these things.
Right.
That started all the way back in Rome. The Roman emperor, they were stealing, the wealthy were stealing all the money in Rome. They were afraid that the people would rise up because of the poverty, so they built that giant stadium, and they had gladiators killing each other to entertain the people and to keep their minds off it, while all the wealth of Rome was stolen, and they threw them bread.
And if you don't think that the young men who are involved in our sports are gladiators, just look at the recent settlement of the NFL with their players whose brains have been and bodies have been rattled and racked. They gave them, and this is what I fault the NFL union. You're talking about unions sold out. They gave them peanuts, chump change. These young men whose brains have been destroyed by concussion after concussion.
And you better believe law firms were trading lots of dollars under the table.
Oh, yes.
I mean, one thing about me being self-taught in what's going on in my apartment in Gramercy Park is that it's so evident from my paperwork. It's been filed since 2010. You can see me figuring it out by myself. My paperwork starts very primitive, and it starts to go faster and faster. And like I say, you know, framing the Black Panthers.
Where did you go for that information, may I ask, as you developed your enlightenment?
Well, on the internet. It was on foreclosure. I started to notice, first of all, I did a documentary on low-level radioactive stones. And when I was working with these radioactive stones, I noticed I wasn't needing my reading glasses anymore. Well, I was very impressed that because I'd been doing great, you know, the Bates method for better eyesight, but nothing ever affected it like these radioactive stones. So from that documentary, I posted it on the internet, and I had one healer who worked with a lady who had breast cancer so bad that you could smell it when you came into the house. So it wasn't that she didn't have cancer. She got a very radioactive rock and put it on this bloody, drippy breast cancer, and it healed rather quickly. So I posted this, and then viewers, at this time, even though I wasn't making any money from posting on the internet on YouTube, I had my own, you know, research and development team, because YouTube was giving me probably traffic they stole from people before. Now I realize that, you know, what goes around comes around. Now that I'm being ripped off, I can see it. But at the beginning, it was great. I was getting all this attention, 5 million hits on YouTube. So they came back and they said, there's something even more compelling than radioactive stones, and that was the essential oil of marijuana. Well, I had been completely against marijuana and drugs because I was doing long mantras and things, and I thought that was bad. So I looked at these patents, and I saw patents on marijuana. There's 9 patents, but the one that I saw was called Cannabinoids as Neuroprotectants, written by a now deceased Nobel Prize winner, talking about the oil. And when you smoke it, you destroy the medicine. So it took me 2 years to find the oil. Alan Steinfeld was my boyfriend at the time, and I said, please, you know, there was a few people I thought that he knew that, you know, and in the back of his mind, he kind of wanted to do it, but everybody sort of stays away. If you're sort of a new ager, you don't do drugs, you know. So he didn't have that connection, but you know, more and more evidence was coming in. I wanted to see this. And then I met Joe. And I fell in love with Joe and his son as they were arguing in front of the judge, because, like you say, when truth is coming out, it's exciting, you know, when real justice starts to happen. And Joe would be answering back to the judge, and I thought, wow, this is incredible. So as I got to know Joe better and his case, he got on the internet in 2008. Now, I feel very certain that they spied on him through the internet, and they were giving all these sheriff's departments all the new gadgets and stuff, and so they thought, great, we found the guy, they've got 300 plants and so on, but you've still got the problem of the search warrant. Who have they harmed? So they said that on an anonymous tip they came in. Well, that's wrong. Like, if Lynne came from a police family, I actually learned a lot from a man who was taught by policemen. And he said every arrest is a citizen's arrest. You have to have somebody who has been violated to sign the complaint. The police are supposed to have a signature. So if anything goes wrong with the arrest, the onus goes back and the responsibility on whoever signed it. That's why a judge's signature on the warrant is so important. So when you ask how I learned what I did about the foreclosure fraud and the banking fraud, is I knew it was very strange that my board changed my locks in 2004 when I was in India. But I was waiting to get back in the bucks to where I could hire lawyers so I could go after them, because this offended me. It was my ego that was hurt. Why were my locks changed? Well, by the time I filed a lawsuit through the help of a friend, because I never got back in the bucks, he filed a boilerplate template key lock change for $2 million remedy. And it was immediately accepted, because you have to give food to these law firms to keep them in business. So they need lawsuits, and mine was a no-brainer. Probably had I gone through in the way they had expected, I would have wound up with maybe $50, and the law firms would have exchanged the $2 million. Because after filing it, I started getting in the mail insurance companies saying that all the insurance was off. So that means that the right to privacy...
Insurance companies
from the board
building.
Or whatever. In other words, you have to carry insurance against being sued. But the insurance is off if you violate rights. So I knew the right to privacy was important, but I still couldn't quite understand how. So when we were working through Joe's case, because at the beginning Joe got a computer and remembered some discussions he had with a man called, what was the guy's name? The 13th Amendment, missing 13th Amendment guy.
Oh, David Dodge.
David Dodge was doing research on the missing 13th Amendment, and he went up to old libraries in Maine and Vermont.
Libraries again.
Yeah, libraries again, yes.
Yeah.
And he discovered that we had a 13th Amendment that said judges should not come from a privileged class, that you should be tried by your peers, no lawyer class. And this amendment had been passed, but eventually they went to all the libraries and buried the evidence about the real 13th Amendment.
Right.
And subsequently the 14th Amendment that you think freed the slaves actually enslaved everybody. But that's a whole other discussion.
Yes.
So with the pot thing, I said to Joe, Joe, there's things here that are so similar to foreclosure, because I started listening to foreclosure people on the internet. And again, it was black voices that were so savvy, so sharp, picking up the swindle that I wasn't seeing, and I think most white people wouldn't see, because, like Joe said again, when you've been beat by somebody, you learn those moves so you can block it the next time the move comes. But if you're white and you haven't been in any of this, and you've also been profoundly miseducated. In other words, they miseducate black people, but they miseducate white people.
Exactly.
Just in different ways.
In different, they spin it in a different way so you don't see it. That's why I'm saying Theater 80 for the Lynne Stewart event in May, getting this DVD. I didn't even have the full money for the DVD. I think it was $10. I only had 7 or 8. And the guy, he looked at me and he decided it was worth it to let go of it for 7 or 8. So I took that DVD home, Framing the Black Panthers. I said, you know, I've always really wanted to know what was really going on.
Exactly.
Because I was from Berkeley.
Yes.
This started to happen in Oakland.
Right.
But I went to a girls' school where I changed buses and I'm in my uniform, and I didn't have a breath of a chance to figure out what happened. Maybe on Telegraph Avenue, You'd see in a record store maybe a little display where you'd see some of the real characters. But, you know, you're a kid. You don't really have that much time, or you're not really encouraged. I knew public access was important. I knew the zip code was evil, but I didn't quite understand why. I mean, in Berkeley, they spin things differently, just like the person who didn't know Lynne's husband was black and was kind of shocked that she didn't know it, just because she prided herself on being a Berkeley progressive.
Yes.
How could she have not known this?
Right.
You know?
So was the connection between your rights as a tenant and then the medical thing?
Well, see, I wasn't a tenant. I was an owner.
Okay.
So then when Joe looked at the contract, he said, you know, when you make a, because Joe's a dealer, right? You make a deal. You have to be honorable. You have to go, you have this, I have this. You know, particularly if you get something in writing, he said you can go through any contract and you change what you don't like. You initial it and then you sign it. So it became very evident that the proprietary lease is an unconscionable contract. But since the key was changed, the lock was changed, that means instantly it became null and void. But it took me years to figure this out. Like I say, I'm self-taught. But because when you're self-taught, you can't be swindled because you pulled yourself up from your own bootstraps. You see what's going on. It's a swindle.
This takes us back to Frederick Douglass again, on learning how to read and write. And one of the things he said is education and slavery are incompatible.
Completely.
Totally incompatible.
Well,
this is why they don't want a public school system. This is why they don't want libraries. This is why they don't want WBAI. I'm sorry,
but
Mr.
you see,
Poynter.
the country has progressed or regressed to the state of there is no law. It is irrelevant.
Right.
And one of the things that comes
as you and Lynn always tell me, for people like me, there never was law.
That's right.
That's why Trayvon Martin is not a surprise. What is a surprise is that this so-called hip generation, we in the 60s would have solved their hash in 2 seconds. We would have boycotted everything for her. We would have shut the country down economically. And these little modern day, all I got to say about this youth right now, you're a bunch of chumps. You can't even give up Tropicana juice. For 2 weeks. I mean,
but they're on their little iPhones, and these little iPhones through, I call it IP address discrimination. It's worse than sexual discrimination, than race discrimination, than religious discrimination, because it means each IP address, they can determine what that little thing gets and what it doesn't get. And they can start to put you in chat rooms so that you think. I mean, I don't know who I'm... If I'm going out on analog, we're going out on analog right now. It's harder to create back doors and so on with analog, although it has been done. I know it because I've talked to people in master control from years back. So there are dirty things that are done to keep the public from having access to knowledge. But nothing like the precision of the IP address discrimination. However, if you know law, if they can look at you, you can just as easily look right back at them, and you can pin them, and you can find the exact IP address that violated your rights. Now, one man told me about this in Berkeley.
WikiLeaks and Julian Assange so dangerous, and why they had to go after him the way they did.
Well, but you know, but go for IP address and hacking, because one guy told me in Berkeley that the Air Force was coming in and looking at him. He said the whole country of China was looking at him. He thought, what's so interesting that they're looking at me? But because he's an expert at this, he knew they were looking. Well, when the Air Force from somewhere in Northern California were looking at him, he could pin the exact IP address. They fired that guy, but then Joe...
I said that he was probably working for the Air Force, and they just told him, "Oh, we fired him because he got caught." But they just moved him and said, "Don't go there no more." I don't think they really fired him. But one of the points I like to make about what she's saying is, right now they got all these kids with this thing. They can now say, keep these kids to only certain knowledge. If they try to access something, they can reroute them to someplace else. And they can, you know, these little boxes that these kids got, I think, is one of the most dangerous things happening to this country.
Unless you educate them.
Unless you educate them.
Well, you see, the interesting thing is, more dangerous than that is people not aware of what they don't know and people not wanting to find out what they don't know.
Right.
And this is where
but they
we
can
are.
They can keep people
Yes.
from finding out what they want to know.
Before that, you see, as long as people are searching for information, everything is okay. But when people are more interested in who sings what the best on any given night, then we are had.
Right.
And so my daughter used to say to me, Dad, what are you worried about the young people? She says, they're not coming to your meeting tonight. And I'm saying, well, how do you know? And she said, because they're watching who can sing the best tonight. This is a big night. And I'd say, oh, and I don't want it to be true.
American Idol.
Whatever it was.
Yeah.
And so she says, you're going to be there. If that's what your aim is, you better pick another night for this particular meeting. Because and then she says, even if you pick another night, they're going to be afraid to come to your meeting because you have a history. And what they have learned is Ralph is bad. The government is good. And if you associate with him, even if you can sing the best on any given night, you're not going to get a chance because you'll be labeled as one of those people.
Wow.
And I say, I kind of get disgusted with her. And I'm saying, there's more truth to that than, like
But as you're talking about there is no law, if there were law, there is no way the insurance companies would be able to dip their straw into our health benefits the way they do. They serve no purpose.
They really don't.
Absolutely no purpose.
That's another
but they can
third-party
no longer
swindle.
steal from abroad the way they used to. They're being kicked out of countries all over the world as people all over the world take their countries back. So now they're coming here, and I have to say, Ralph and Lynne were one of the first people I heard say this. When those who are running the world, the corporations, lose their constituencies abroad in countries that develop enough strength to kick America's control out of their government, then they're going to come here and try to enslave us. And when you look at what's happening with our health system, or what's laughingly called a health system, a small country like Guyana has single-payer health care, and we can't get it? This is absurd. There's only one reason why we can't get it, and that's because of corruption and the lack of morality in this nation state.
That's why they give licenses to practice medicine, because the doctors really don't know how to heal. They know how to kiss the ass of the insurance people. I've watched it in the nursing homes. It's disgusting. If you really want to heal, and I told this to foreclosure experts that came to my place, they were shaking me and trying to scare me and stuff, and I was talking to them, and one of them, cancer did come up, and all of a sudden, in the middle of talking about, what would I do if they foreclose on me, I said, okay, I'm going to have cameras here. When they kick in the door, I'm going to get the faces of all those people, because it's all unlawful. I know it was. And right in the middle of talking about this, because the younger guy who was probably brought there as a witness, because, we're talking about fraud.
Yes.
So when you're talking about fraud, nothing's going to be in writing. They can't send anything through the mail. But I thank them for coming and talking to me, because I always like to talk to people. But in the middle, to the young guy, I said, when it comes to healing cancer, you've got to have a lion of a doctor. You've got to have an advocate, somebody that's going to go in there and balance you out, because law is natural. Law, you drop an apple, it falls. It's the law of gravity. Ignorance of the law is no excuse. So if you're seeking remedy in the courts, it goes same with curing the human body. And so if you are off balance, something's wrong, you go to somebody like someone would go to Lynne, because she's an expert in her field. The person who needs her help doesn't have the time to study everything she's studied. So same thing with cancer and on all these other diseases. We are seeking our remedy. That's what we need. And to find it, you need a strong advocate. You don't need a sellout and a wimp. And that's why
what
our
the whole
health
medical
care is.
system is.
Yes.
It's all
And
about
that's
money.
what's behind the criminalization
It's about money.
of marijuana.
Yeah,
It's money.
Yes. I mean, I saw
So one
in the,
group
I
of
saw
people
in the
don't want
nursing.
another group of people to have the
I saw
money.
in the
It's
nursing
actually
homes.
the whole drug war.
Yes.
Not just
Yeah.
marijuana is a prime example and easy
Right.
to use as an example.
Exactly.
But the whole drug war is just a way to enslave people.
Because the whole nursing
The whole
home,
drug war.
the only knowledge they had, they couldn't get my mother to swallow. I came in there and brought an acupuncturist in. That's why the Black Panther got 30 years in prison, because he probably moved into a hospital that was probably legitimately foreclosed because it was abandoned. They couldn't pay whatever. So here's an empty building. Here you needed to help people. It was such a natural. If they had not locked him up, in no time flat, he could have shown a superior medical system, not just for black people, for the entire city.
A medical alternative.
Or that works.
That works.
That works.
Yes.
Even alternative implies that the thing in place is working. It's not working. People are dying.
Can I jump in 1 second, since we brought up the drug thing? The Supreme Court overturned prohibition, and when they overturned alcohol prohibition, they said you can't prohibit from the American people, right? Which means I don't care what drug people are doing, you can't prohibit from the people. The whole drug war was a scam just to fill our prisons and enslave people. You know?
And to keep
now,
the
I'm not saying
pharmaceutical thing
that
going.
I advocate people doing heroin, because heroin, the government addicted all those people. The government pushed heroin. The government pushed cocaine. Noriega was working with Bush, Daddy Bush, and that whole thing, the Iran-Contra thing. They were trading guns for cocaine, bringing it in and dumping it in the ghettos. You know? But then they used these bogus drug wars to arrest all the people in the ghetto that they were supplying with drugs. You know, it's
destroy
still
the
about
neighborhoods
slavery.
and to pick up the buildings.
Well, the whole issue of drugs, and it was obvious to anyone who could think. And I used to speak around Harlem about it constantly and say there's no war on drugs, there's a war on us.
Right.
People.
War on
Nothing
people.
to do with drugs. I says, understand something. A society that doesn't care about what you eat, a society that would sell you a cigarette that the government has helped to make killer,
That's right.
because understand, cigarettes are responsible for more health problems than all of the other drugs combined.
Right.
And this government, they've done that. They don't care about your education. They don't care about your health care. They don't care about hospitals. They care about what you put in your body. Be serious. They do not. And don't let them confuse that. But what they did again was they confused people. They had preachers saying, we need more policemen. They had, the drugs are destroying the society. And I'm saying, wait a minute. The society was always destroyed. It has never been a society. We in the black community have never gotten beyond colony. We are still a colony. And then when they don't want it, they take over your colony. We are just a caretaker on the physical area where a colony that we were existed. We never got to the status of ghetto where we controlled our resources, etc. This is what no. And understand this whole political thing. So what is the enemy? Education is the enemy.
And that's
Truth
where
is
Lynne
the
comes
enemy.
in, because she used to say all of her clients were potential political prisoners.
Yeah.
Because if you have an economic system and the only way out of this vice of poverty and starvation is a good education, and yet one group of people gets that good education for free and another group does not, and it is by design, because there's no way you can tell me any human being is uneducable. Having been a teacher for over 40 years, I know this is not true.
Yeah.
Then you are setting these children up to become political prisoners, because the only route for them to survive is to go into a life of crime to make a living. This is what drugs is all about.
Yeah, because
it's about making a living.
Right.
And for these preachers and for the Black Congressional Caucus to vote for stronger legislation to incarcerate people who are involved in drugs is duplicitous and it's perfidious and cowardice. Why didn't they fight for community control the way they fought the war on drugs? If the preachers who are now marching telling these children to turn in their guns would adopt a public school, you could end most of the guns.
Right.
You could control the gangs. How do I know?
Right.
Every school I've been in, I've been successful with that group of students.
Well, that's
All right?
the whole idea of due process.
Thank you.
Everything. It's as Lynn says, how do we sum up what is the problem of America? What is the quickest way and the most proficient way to sum it up? And I says, tell me. And she says, recognize there is a total loss of morality.
Yeah.
Dealing with anything. There is no morality.
Right.
It's all gone.
Right.
You talk about the law, and we can talk about the law. There was never a law in America that the system was bound to respect regarding people of a hue of like mine. Herman Wallace, who was dying, well, he was not guilty. He submitted this, like
his own case.
He was 40 years in solitary?
41, I believe it was.
41.
Is
he dead? Did he die?
No, well, as far as I know,
it's a death watch now.
There's a death watch. He's about to go. But one of the things that you realize when you begin to just casually look at the case, he filed this complaint that he was unjustly incarcerated 39 years ago. Hey.
He fought his own case.
And so now, 39 years, cancer, dying, 5 minutes before dying, as we say, hey, that's an unjust way. There's no victory in Herman Wallace getting out of jail.
It's a Pyrrhic victory.
It's nothing, because he's going to be dead. We don't want that type of victory for Lynne Stewart. We don't want 5 minutes before she's ready to die, let her out. Marilyn Buck, 10 days before she's ready to die, let her out. No, that is not a victory.
And that's the tip of the iceberg.
We, the people, have allowed this system to go on unabated because of color, class.
There are over 70 political prisoners, warriors from the 60s, over 100, who are reaching this age group. They aged out. They maxed out their time. And
But
under
they're still in
Obama,
jail.
they were re-indicted?
No, they weren't re-indicted. They just didn't get out of jail.
They
The
just
Obama
wouldn't let them out.
administration did nothing about it. So much, and see, we have to examine that. There's no morality or truth in education. We go back to who is a smart person? Somebody who went to Harvard University. Total nonsense. Who did we have? Kissinger, domino theory. And everybody says, oh, he's the brightest. Let's go to war on the domino theory. And anybody who studied anything about history knew that the domino theory was a fraud. For 6,000 years, the Chinese...
What about Greenberg? Is that his name and his economic theory?
Yeah.
What was his name?
No, you're talking about the... help me here. The
trickle-down economy?
The chairman of the Fed.
Yeah.
Come on.
Greenspan?
Greenspan.